welcome, and thank you for joining me for this second session on the prophet Ezekiel. And in this session, we are going to have a look at prophet Ezekiel's vision of God and his view of humanity from God's perspective. So we begin with prayer. Lord, please meet us in your word and through your servants, the prophets. Amen. Ezekiel chapter 8. We're going to look in detail at this heavy chapter later in the study session, and I hope you managed to read it beforehand. Here are the first 4 verses to remind us. In the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day, while I was sitting in my house, and the elders of Judah were sitting before me, the hand of the sovereign Lord came on me there. I looked, and I saw a figure like that of a man. From what appeared to be his waist down he was like fire, and from there up his appearance was as bright as glowing metal. He stretched out what looked like a hand and took me by the hair of my head. The Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and in visions of God he took me to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the north gate of the inner court, where the idol that provokes to jealousy stood. And there before me was the glory of the God of Israel, as in the vision I had seen in the plain. In our last session, we discovered the Lord God at work in the complex maneuverings of kings and kingdoms, of superpowers and small vassal states, and our study focused on the last years of the kingdom of Judah. In the midst of all the diplomacy and changing internal and external policies, the Lord had his spokesman declaring what was going on and why it was going on from his perspective. Here is prophet Ezekiel. Disobedience and faithlessness by the people living in covenant relationship with Yahweh could lead only to judgment. Such judgment comes to the faithless kingdom of Judah at the hands of the Babylonians. In 586 BC, Judah's capital, Jerusalem, is burned to the ground and the people taken into captivity. In our last session, we also discovered the Lord God intimately involved in the lost aspirations and crushed hopes of a solitary individual. Ezekiel, the never-to-be priest, finds Yahweh appearing to him in exile, calling him to be prophet, not priest, spokesman on behalf of Yahweh himself to a people in captivity. New vocation, new meaning in life replaces despair as Yahweh meets with his man for this moment. Beyond the seemingly sovereign statements and acts of emperors, kings, and rulers, God has his purposes to fulfill. Ezekiel, then, is a prophet of the Babylonian captivity. He was taken into exile in 598 BC. In Babylon, in exile by the river Keba, Ezekiel speaks the word of Yahweh amongst the exiles. Ezekiel's ministry coheres around the fall of Jerusalem. Here it is. Here are the kings of Babylon. Here are the last kings of Judah. This is the long 70-year period of Jewish captivity or exile. Here are the prophets, Jeremiah, Daniel, and here's Ezekiel. Ezekiel begins prophesying 6 years before the fall of Jerusalem. And he continues after it for a further 16 years. As we shall see, Ezekiel's message changes overnight once he hears news of the fall of Jerusalem. It happens in chapter 33 of Ezekiel. Some of the most dramatic experiences in Ezekiel's own life revolve around that one great calamity that the people of Judah believed could never happen: God abandoning Jerusalem. Before we get to the burden of Ezekiel's message, we need in this session to grasp the all-embracing vision which formed the foundation for Ezekiel's message. And in this session, we look at two aspects of that vision: Ezekiel's view of God and Ezekiel's view of humanity as he discovers it from God's perspective. So we will look firstly at Ezekiel's view of God. The distinctive view of God, which is Ezekiel's, is that God is glorious. Ezekiel has a vision of God in all his glory. If you remember Isaiah's conviction, God is holy. Jeremiah's conviction, God is good. Here is Ezekiel's conviction. From the experience of his call by Yahweh to his vision of the ultimate return of God to his people, Ezekiel sees manifested the glory of the Lord. Here's part of Ezekiel's call. Above the vault over their heads was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of the one speaking. Ezekiel's transferal, where he's moved from one place to another. Then the Spirit lifted me up, and I heard behind me a loud rumbling sound as the glory of the Lord rose from the place where it was standing. It was the sound of the wings of the living creatures brushing against each other, and the sound of the wheels beside them, a loud rumbling sound. And Ezekiel's meeting with the Lord in the plain. So I got up and went out to the plain, and the glory of the Lord was standing there, like the glory I had seen by the river Kiba, and I fell face down. And in Ezekiel's vision of Jerusalem, and there before me was the glory of the God of Israel, as in the vision I had seen in the plain. In Ezekiel's vision of the abandoning by Yahweh of the temple, then the glory of the Lord rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. The cloud filled the temple, and the court was full of the radiance of the glory of the Lord. Then in Ezekiel's condemnation of the nations, it's about the glory of the Lord. For example, Sidon. And say, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I am against you, Sidon, and among you I will display my glory. You will know that I am the Lord when I inflict punishment on you, and within you am proved to be holy. Then in Ezekiel's vision of a return by Yahweh to a restored temple. This is chapter 43, towards the end of the book. Then the man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. The vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and like the visions I had seen by the river Kibar, and I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. So we have a pause for thought. Has such a vision of the glory of the Lord touched our lives? We sing glory to God in the highest. We often declare, yours, Lord, is the greatness, the power, the splendor, the glory, and the majesty. Has that glory in any way touched our lives as it touched Ezekiel's? Maybe you'd like to come back to that pause of thought during the days ahead after we finish this study, and have a think about the glory of the Lord. We need to note that God's glory was revealed in exile. God's special self-revelation as the glorious one comes in the place of hopelessness, of the death of a dream, of exile. Remember Moses in the backside of the desert? Remember a cast out Hagar? Remember a captive Ezekiel? Death of a dream of some sort seemed to be in each of their experience. Yet in the wilderness, in the geography of hopelessness and lifelessness, God reveals his glory to each of them. We need to note that God's glory was revealed also through judgment. In the city of Jerusalem, the people are found wanting. After all the warnings, despite the terrible example of Samaria, after all the calls to repentance, human sinfulness reaps its ultimate reward from a covenantal God. Judgment. It is the Lord of glory who enacts such judgment. He is different from the idols infiltrating the temple. He is glorious, consistent, unable ultimately to live alongside human sinfulness. To ascribe his glory to others in the very place set apart for worship of Yahweh is to invite the inevitable. Yahweh, the true God of glory, departs and lets the idolatrous people bring down judgment upon themselves. We need to note that God's glory was revealed in both his departure from the temple and his return to the temple. The glory of the Lord rises up from the cherubim in the Holy of Holies to the threshold of the temple. Then it shifts to the east gate and off to the mountains east of the city. From there it disappears. It takes 2 chapters, chapters 9 and 10 of Ezekiel's book, to describe this departure of the glory of the Lord. It is as if the glory of the Lord does not want to depart. It lingers and lingers, but ultimately cannot stay. Remember Ichabod? The glory has departed from Israel, is what the word means. It was the name given by Eli's daughter-in-law to the child she bore as the Philistines captured the Ark of God, described in 1 Samuel chapter 4. She named the boy Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," because of the capture of the Ark of God and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband. Ichabod literally means inglorious or no glory. The glory of God cannot stay where sin and idolatry is enthroned. There is no room for 2 glories in the temple, in the holy city. Finally, at the end of Ezekiel's book, the glory of the Lord returns to a different temple, in the midst of a different kind of people, with whispers of a greater fulfillment. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. That's how the New Jerusalem is described in the book of Revelation. It is full of the glory of God. So, through Ezekiel's vision of God, we discover God's glory revealed in exile, God's glory revealed in judgment, God's glory revealed in the withdrawal and reappearance of God's presence. Ezekiel's vision of God is focused in the glory of the Lord. Humanity, in the light of God's glory, according to Ezekiel, is utterly sinful beyond hope. And the Apostle Paul shares Ezekiel's view of humanity. There it is in Romans chapter 3, verse 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Sinfulness beyond hope is discovered at the very center of the cultus of the temple in Jerusalem. What is happening in the heart of the place of worship for the people of Judah? Ezekiel is carried into the core of the temple in vision in 592 BC, and there he discovers the following abominations. And this is what we discover in chapter 8, that heavy chapter of Ezekiel. We find the image of jealousy. Then he said to me, Son of man, look towards the north. So I looked, and in the entrance north of the gate of the altar, I saw this idol of jealousy. This was an image of Asherah, a Canaanite goddess. Such an image had first been placed in the temple by King Manasseh. King Josiah had cleansed the temple of such idols, but one of Josiah's successors had placed another image back in the temple precincts. In fact, the image was erected in the most honored northern gateway between the temple and the royal palace. Chapter 8, verses 10 to 11, we discover animal worship going on. So I went in and looked, and I saw portrayed all over the walls all kinds of crawling things and unclean animals and all the idols of Israel. In front of them stood 70 elders of Israel, and Jaazaniah, son of Shaphan, was standing among them. Each had a censer in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. Elders of the people of Judah were involved secretly in this abomination. It is sobering to realize that Jaazaniah's father, Shaphan, had been a leader in Josiah's reformation. In 2 Kings chapter 22, verse 8, we read, Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord. He gave it to Shaphan, who read it. The animal deities from Egyptian, Canaanite, and Babylonian religions had found their way into the Israelite cultus via the political involvement of such elders with foreign politicians in their contemporary world. What they were doing corporately in the temple, they were also doing privately in their own chambers. We discover the worship of Tammuz. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and I saw women sitting there, mourning the god Tammuz. At summer solstice, Babylonian women mourned the death of this handsome god of birth and life and death and rebirth over a 6-day funeral period. The 4th Babylonian month was named Tammuz, a name that was adopted into the Jewish calendar for their 4th month. The weeping Jewish women in the temple, gazing upon the naked statue of Tammuz, used to work themselves into a frenzy of passionate desire. John Milton penned these lines regarding it in his poem Paradise Lost. The love tale infected Zion's daughters with like heat, whose wanton passions in the sacred porch Ezekiel saw, when, by the vision led, his eyes surveyed the dark idolatries of alienated Judah. And then we discover nature worship at the center of the cultus. He then brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord, and there at the entrance to the temple, between the portico and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs towards the temple of the Lord, and their faces towards the east. They were bowing down to the sun in the east. Here is the climax of the abominations witnessed by Ezekiel in his awful vision. The heads of the 24 cadres of the sacred priesthood, led by the high priest, making up the 25 men mentioned here, were not only worshipping the sun, but they were doing so in the very temple of God, with their backs turned upon the sacred temple of Yahweh. Listen again to the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1, verses 22 to 23. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. Much of Ezekiel's prophesying prior to the fall of Jerusalem constitutes an exposition of humankind's grievous sinfulness. So in chapter 13, verses 1 to 16, Ezekiel castigates the false prophets and prophetesses for undermining the nation. Such people speak out of their own imagination, he says, verse 2, and encourage a false sense of security in the apostate nation. In chapter 13, verses 17 to 23, Ezekiel attacks the mediums and diviners who have encroached on the nation's religious life, sucking away any hunger for the living God, substituting false hopes and false allegiances. In chapter 16, Ezekiel uses a broken marriage image to try and shock the people of Judah into repentance. Judah has become a prostitute, he says, lavishing her favors on one false god after another. Verse 15. In chapter 22, verses 1 to 31, Ezekiel condemns the Holy Spirit. In chapter 22, verses 1 to 31, Ezekiel condemns the holy city, Jerusalem itself. She is a city of blood, verse 2, whose catalogue of sins include religious, sexual, social, and judicial crimes. Those guilty of sinning include priests, princes, prophets, nobles, and the people of Judah. And in chapter 23, verses 1 to 49, Ezekiel tells the parable of the 2 adulterous sisters who became prostitutes, Oholah and Oholibah. And Ezekiel says plainly that Oholah's other name is Samaria, and Oholibah's other name is Jerusalem. Verse 4. As one commentator writes, the feeling of nausea which a chapter like this arouses must be blamed not on the writer of the chapter, nor even on its contents, but on the conduct which had to be described in such revolting terms. Of course, to the people of Judah themselves, everything they were involved in seemed perfectly normal. The nobles and elders were merely doing the same as leaders of other nations in their contemporary world. The priests and prophets were trying to accommodate the theological insights of others in their own allegiances and practices. The king was simply walking a tightrope of balancing the contradictory demands and influence of Babylon, Egypt, and other vassal states. To Ezekiel, the prophet of the glorious God, the man who was thrown onto his face in the Babylonian desert by his encounter with the living God, all the acts and allegiances and normality of the people of Judah was like filth. For he came to look at humankind out of a vision of the glory of the Lord. Ezekiel's view of humankind is a view of a creature utterly dead in sin. So the prophet of the exile sees and speaks. The Lord is the God of glory. In judgment, in exile and return, God is glorious. Humankind is totally dead in sin. It despises the glory in its midst, causes it to depart by its apostasy, and with that departure embraces the consequences of sin, namely judgment. In our next session, we shall consider the unique burden of Ezekiel's message. The prophet has seen the glory. He has described the absolute sinfulness. In 586 BC, Jerusalem fell. Ezekiel had only been preaching for 6 years. What did he have to say in the remaining 16 years of his prophetic ministry? It would be great if you could read Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 16 to 38 before our next session. At the end of this one, let's just pause a moment to pray. Father, thank you for the unveiling of the glory of God through prophet Ezekiel's experience and preaching. Thank you that it's a vision that the Apostle Paul glimpsed. We pray that in your mercy you would allow us to touch your glory. And in the light of that glory, we confess, O Lord, that we human beings are so utterly dead, utterly inglorious, committed to so many other allegiances that appear exceedingly normal to us, but in spiritual reality insult you and even cause you to withdraw. And yet in your mercy, through the horror even of judgment, you cannot stay away, and you promise to return. Lord, help us to live our lives in deeper association with you, the God of glory, for Jesus' sake. Amen. I look forward to being with you for our next study session, in which we shall look at the burden of Ezekiel's message. Bye for now.